I can talk about some other shit. You do for some other man. I'm looking for a brothership. I need a place where I can talk about some other shit. You do for some other man. I'm looking for a brothership. It's substance. Hello. Bro, you know we on a mission, let's roll. Yeah, I'm a shit show. It's everything you know. Come on, so we help each other grow. That's how I it's substance. Hello. Bro, you know we on a mission, let's roll. Yeah.
Okay, I think we're live now. So welcome to the Brothaship. This is our monthly show, and I want to first thank all of the people that have been subscribing and have been joining regularly, because I think this is our fourth show. And again, our purpose is very simple. It's to kind of have a dialogue with the brothers pertaining to subjects and content that are informative and provoke thought. So this is, a series that we're going to continue to move forward. And today's subject is something that I think will have some good perspective from everyone. It's about financial literacy. And we've titled the show Net Worth, the Power of the Almighty Dollar, in the hopes that you'll listen and maybe come away with something that encourages you to increase your net worth. So on the panel, I have Bay on, as well as Jerry, and we're going to start the conversation by simply just throwing it out there. What's your guys' perspective of net worth?
I'll let Jerry take it. Jerry, you can go ahead.
Mine is going to be real simple. It is, a plus and minus, right? Or all your liabilities minus your assets and what's left. But I do want to jump back in once, Bay goes and talk about the dynamics of why it's not discussed in a family situation.
Okay. Bay?
Well, the net worth is, basically, guys, I'm always the simple one. Just what's left over after everything is said and done is what you got left over, and in this country, we're in a bad spot, as far as net worth. We got to start working and getting our game together where we can build up our net worth, so it's just basically what's left over after what's said and done. I'll make it very simple.
That's why I love Bay, because he gets right down to the basic elements. And I try to do that, and it's a lifelong journey, but I'm going to take the qualitative approach. Net worth defined are your total assets minus your liabilities of an individual or a company for that matter. So your assets would be your cash, any interest-bearing accounts, any savings that you've accumulated, real estate, art, collections, clothing, minus any liabilities that you have. And those liabilities could be remaining mortgage payment, car payment, debt that you've incurred over time, or any type of thing that's owed to a financial institution. Now, the best example I can give you is that, say you had $100 and you have $70 worth of debt. Your net worth is $30. And it's that simple. Now, why I think net worth is a very important topic that we need to discuss, and why net worth matters is because net worth defined is a measure of your financial wealth. You can have high or low income, but your lifestyle could be simple or extravagant, but net worth truly measures where you stand financially. People making 6 or 7 figures with high debt incomes can have a negative net worth due to high debt. And I think the best personification of that we know that we all could relate to would be MC Hammer. Now, at that particular point in time, he had a hit. And I remember way back when, without aging myself, this guy couldn't miss with the output of tunes he was bringing in and the money. Remember the endorsements? I think he had Pepsi, he had KFC, he had it going on. But I remember him, I think it was Ebony Magazine, where they showed his $20 million mansion. And I said then, as a college student, I said, wow, you know, I think this way mathematically. I said, he's got to turn out a lot of hits to pay for that $20 million house. And, you know, as simple as that was, that math example was true, because as the hits dried up, so did his income. And that net worth went from a very positive state to a negative one. And, you know,
Hey, Darren, I guess that's a good thing that you kind of said that, because that's the difference between being wealthy and being rich,
correct.
right? And so he wasn't wealthy because he was unable to sustain his current place, right?
Exactly.
He was rich, and so he wasn't able to figure out how to maintain that wealth and continue going. So going back to assets and liabilities, he was spending more money than he was making him rich for a short period of time instead of wealthy, and expanding that going across longer.
Exactly. You know, you have to get to the point where you can live below your means. You can live below your means. You know, you got to really live low on the hog. You know, spend less money than you make. That's the only way you're going to make it out of this. You know what I'm saying? That's the only way you're going to have any assets. You know, you got to have that extra money.
Now, I've looked at this, and it's something that I really have made a focus in my personal situation. And I've come to the conclusion that you can make money 4 ways. Typically, you can inherit it, which means that, you know, it's something that's been passed to you generationally. You can be lucky and you can marry into it, which, you know, both male and females have done successfully. But the 2 biggest ways of people creating or increasing their net worth has been either creating a business or a service. That's your entrepreneurial route. That's where, you know, a Jeff Bezos can be in his basement, or, you know, a Steve Jobs can be in his garage and create an Apple, and then just, you know, exponentially grow through the fruits of that product or service and create jobs and extreme wealth. That's one way to do it. And then the last one, which is the most, I'll say the most prevalent with differing outcomes, is leveraging the procurement of education or a skill set or a trade, and then working for someone, and then saving and trying to increase your net worth through wages. Now, there may be other ways that I may have missed, but I think that if you take those 4 routes of, you know, how you incur wealth in America, those are by far the most obvious. Is there something that I missed, guys, that you may want to add?
No, you hit it right on the head. And what we're going through right now, we're going through a wave of entrepreneurship, where everybody's coming out with these new ideas and fulfilling needs, because, you know, the job market is crap right now. But basically, the job market is in the garbage, and everybody's just coming out with all these new ideas, new concepts, and trying to fulfill all different kinds of needs, because the situation we're in with society right now. You know, so it's a big thing with entrepreneurship right now. It's like amazing the things you can do if you just have that drive to get it done.
I agree with you guys. And again, I want to kind of go back to, you know, wealth building and how is it a problem for us? Why is it a problem for us? And I guess for me, looking back in history, just trying to figure it out. I mean, I don't want to say we were poor. I mean, we weren't upper middle class growing up, right? And so, but I do remember not having any real conversation about finance. You know, when I asked my parents, hey, could I have this? It was yes or no. And I think there should be some conversations behind that, right? Well, here's the money coming in. if you can figure out how we can make that happen, absolutely, you can get what you need, or we can help you with this amount of money and you need to get to this other piece. You know, I think that lack of conversation of what finances is and what it means to the family is detrimental to us, because I don't think a lot of us have those conversations. And then I guess I'm going to jump into another part and we can tackle that later. We seem to be the only race that readily kicks our kids out at 18, not remembering how ill-equipped we were to deal with life, and then hoping they succeed. So I just want to kind of throw that out there.
Well, I'll share an anecdote that actually was something that I stumbled onto, but it helped me. I had two parents that both were professionals and they worked. And I think it was a model that a lot of our parents use. You got a job and you saved money, and that was it. Now, my dad was a saver and my mom, she saved as well, but she liked the nicer things. And if you know her, she's always been a sharp woman. Now, that helped someone being a saver. And when I look at how that's translated into my situation, I'm not a saver, I'm an investor. So when I look at what I actually accumulate, I have a mathematical equation where a certain amount of that money is automatically invested before I even see it, because we have been able to leverage technology through automated investing, et cetera. But to get to Jerry's point, when we learn about money as children, you hit the nail on the hammer, because we are consumers by just human behavior. I want, and I'll never forget when I was about 12 years old, I wanted some DJ equipment. And that's what I told my dad. I said, I want. And he says, you know what? I want a nice new Cadillac. He says, but this is how we're going to do it. He said, if you really want that equipment, I'm going to give you a life lesson that you're always going to have to do. He says, I want you to get a job and help me get you that equipment. So in other words, he says, how much is that equipment? And I knew because I had it in my head. I said $850 or thereabouts, 2 turntables, the 2 speakers, and the mixer. He said, okay, 850. He says, okay. He says, you know how much the minimum wage is? I knew at that time, I think it was maybe $4.25 or something like that. He says, okay. He goes, so school's out. If you get a job and you get, he said, a third of it. He says, you know how much that is? It's long form. Yeah, roughly, 250, something like that. He goes, okay, you get the 250 and I'll give you the rest and you're in business. That was the first incentivization for me at 12 years old to understand, one, the risk and reward of working. And I actually got a job cleaning pinball machines and things of that nature. And when I got the money, he was like, this is considered a loan. And when he said that, I've looked at him because I was like, man, you're like a loan shark. He says, no, I'm just trying to explain to you that's how it works. He says, now that you have this DJ equipment, what are you going to do with it? I said, I'm going to do parties and learn how to mix or what have you. Now, I'm sharing the story to say that while that was something that I wanted, I actually began to use that and created a product or a service. I actually started doing parties. And when I first got that first paycheck through word of mouth, doing a friend's party in a backyard, that's when I started to realize or understand the entrepreneurial spirit. And I think that those are certain things that we should be teaching the youth, because that's something that was over 40 years ago that today still serves as an income stream for me today. So, something as simple, and I think, when we talk about net worth, it doesn't begin when you're 18 or 20. So to speak to Jerry's point, that's how a lot of times we are late to the race, because we don't have the fundamentals of understanding the risk and reward of investing or investing in ourselves.
So that's 100% valid point, Darren. And you bring up that story about the DJ equipment. I remember being a kid and I wanted a Sizzler skateboard. And I think it was like $10 at the time. And I think I was 8 or 9 years old and I had to save up to get that skateboard. And it was such an amazing feeling when I got that $10 up and I was able to buy that skateboard for myself, you know, and it's an amazing feeling. And you're exactly right. We don't pass that down to the kids to show them that the amazing feeling of being self-sufficient and getting it yourself instead of having somebody get it for you. And then you have that value on that I had a value on that skateboard. That was my skateboard. That was what I worked for. I treated it much better. So we don't pass that down, and we should pass that down. You know, that's a valuable lesson.
Now, someone in the chat asked the question, and the question that I'll feel to us to answer was, how do we start with the children? What do we teach children to enable them to become fiscally sound and learn how to manage their monies? Now, I'm going to show my age because in Newark, New Jersey, where I'm from, they used to have school savings accounts for kids. And at 8 years old, the bank would come to the school and start a savings fund. And at 8, you know, the seed money was normally from your parents, but that's where this ideology and ethic of maybe shoveling a little snow or asking someone, could you sweep up the barber floor, et cetera, et cetera. So I think starting with children is to start watching or leading through example. My dad used to make me get the Star Ledger, the Daily News, the New York Post, and the New York Times on Sunday. And that was a heavy load. And he'd always read them. So I tried to emulate Dad and read, and I could read, but I remember looking at the financial papers and he always would plant that seed because I was the type that wanted. He says, well, you know what? If you want this, you have to earn it. I said, well, what do you mean to earn it? He says, well, if you have to earn it, you have to work. So I said, well, but I want a house one day. He says, well, you can do that, but you have to do that. So I guess to answer the question from my perspective is that you've got to surround these children and talk to them about money. And it doesn't have to be a lot of money. And I think that's where sometimes we make mistakes because sometimes we assume our personal situation as a limiting factor with respect to educating children, because I can go back to, you know, my grandmother who was I'll say a laborer. You know, she didn't go to college or anything like that, but she saved money. She understood the value of money. So I always call out people when we have these discussions around financial literacy as, we're not going to say that because we don't have unlimited funds, that is a constraint to teaching children the value of hard work, saving, and looking to the future.
I'm gonna jump on that. I don't think you need money to teach that lesson. You know, I work with an organization here in Charlotte called Peak, and basically we did financial literacy on paper, right? We gave people a fictitious amount of money and listed their bills and was like, well, how do you survive through the week, through the month with what you have, right? And so kids began to maneuver and say, well, I don't need, 400 channels on DirecTV. I'm going to cut back because now they're understanding that money is just not unlimited, right? And I guess that goes back to just having that conversation with our children about finances. So I'm not going against you, Darren. I'm agreeing. I don't think we necessarily need money to do it. I think if you sit down and get any play any financial wealth game, and which you can find on the internet and lead with that for the children, I think they're miles ahead.
Yeah, you know what, Jerry, and saying a financial game, Robert Kiyosaki, the guy that wrote Rich Dad, Poor Dad, he has an app that you invest in, you get a certain amount of money and you invest and you play the game and you see how much property you can actually buy on credit and build up your assets and see what your liabilities are. That's a great game, and I actually started playing it myself just to see how good it was. And it's pretty realistic. So, that's, like you said, there's plenty of apps out there to work on
Let me ask a question, because, when we talked about the ways that we can acquire wealth in America, the one with respect, the most prevalent one, getting a education, a skill or a trade. Right now, college costs are at an all-time high. One of my very good friend's daughters just started at Syracuse University, and he told me that annual nut is roughly $65,000 a year, and I almost fell out. What's your guys' perspective? Is education the passport to the future? Or, hear me out, is education becoming something that we really need to analyze? And I'll just say, from a personal assessment and experience, we have to determine and make the hard choice whether or not our children are ready for that type of investment. What are your
Darren, I didn't go to college. I went to trade school and I made over six figures easy. I could have went in business myself. I didn't do that, but I worked for somebody my whole entire life and I made six figures easy. So it was, as far as making money, no, I spent I think I went to Apex Technical School, which you guys probably all seen the commercial for HVAC. And I did that my entire life. And that was a great trade, man. I met a lot of great people. I financially, I was good. I could go on great vacations and stuff like that. Now, as far as financial literacy, I had no idea at that time. I was just like, geez, I'm making a lot of money. Let me waste it all. But, as I've gotten older, I've wised up. But yeah, I don't think college is all that, man. I really don't. And I'm not saying that because I didn't go, but there's other routes to get that financial satisfaction.
Jerry, what do you think?
I agree with both of you. I think, I guess it depends on your path, right? You can't bypass becoming a doctor or a lawyer without going to school. So absolutely, school is necessary if those career paths demand that you have a certain amount of schooling. I don't think school is for everyone. And I think you can make a successful career or livelihood, if you will, without going to school or, I guess, obtaining so much debt. And so I think it's a personal choice in terms of where you want to go. And I think there are ways around that. Maybe you go to a law firm and work your way through and they're willing to pay for some of your schooling. Work at a hospital in a different department that doesn't require it and let that hospital pay, for your schooling, because there are programs, we are short on nurses and doctors. So there are institutions that will pay for you to go to school. And I think we don't put ourselves in the positions to do that. It is of an old mindset. Oh, you got to go to school and then you can get a job as a doctor. And it's like, no, you could go to the hospital, find a job, let the hospital pay for it, and still become a doctor with less debt.
So therein is where I want to hone in on, because I think there is a mentality that or a paradigm, I'll say. I think that's a better way to look at it. There's a paradigm where at one time, and it's evolved, because, and I'm going to go back in history, at one point in time, African Americans weren't even being accepted into institutions of higher learning, which is why HBCUs, which I'm a proud product of, originated. Now, during that time, a lot of people don't know that HBCUs was the #1 way and conduit for African Americans to get into the middle class. Most people studied either education or some other type of form that I'll say that if it wasn't a hard science like engineering or medicine, that was the pathway. What was ironic was when I went to Florida A&M, arguably 40% of my personal friends, their parents went to HBCUs, the Tennessee States, the Wilberforces, the North Carolina States, the Florida A&Ms, the Tuskegees, the Howards, and they studied that. So where I'm going is, those parents, when we had those conversations, they had an expectation that their children went to college. So where I'm going with that is that the paradigms change now. And I'm glad that you guys And we're all in agreement saying that that is just what it is. It's a paradigm. There's money out there where if your child has a skill set, we have to promote it. And one of the things that I would be an advocate of, and what I've told people just in my travels, is that we have to mentor these youngsters, because this teach one philosophy, I think, was more prevalent more so than it is today. And, I've always challenged people that if you do have this information and knowledge, that we share it.
I think
Yeah,
that
but
goes back to,
go ahead, Jerry. Go ahead, Jerry.
real quick, Darren, I think that goes back to not kicking them out at 18, right? I think because there also becomes a disconnect when you put children out. Okay, they might be angry for a minute, and then they go to I'm grown, and they no longer hear what you're saying, as opposed to stay here, let's figure it out. And here's some guidelines, right? You can begin to feed them the information that you're talking about, but I think you put a wedge when you say, okay, you're 18, you gotta go, and then you want to have a conversation. Well, you're going the wrong way. You clearly didn't think they were going the wrong way when you put them out. Why would they listen now?
I'm gonna ask a probing question. And by the way, I was one of those children that at 18 was expected to leave. But when I say that, that was to get a higher level of education. So that was an expectation. But is that really that prevalent? Because and this is why I'm asking the question. I mean, for me, there was an expectation from a very young age going to college prep. I remember having this discussion with my parents. They said, well, there's no need for you going to a prep school if you're not planning on going to college. So let's have that discussion now, because if that's the case, we need to reimagine your future. So is this out at 18 something that's real, and then is it very prevalent? I'm asking the question.
I personally didn't experience that. I mean, at 18, all I was told that I'm not doing your laundry no more, and I'm not cooking for you anymore. I was told that, so I had to learn that right away. But I was still going to trade school and stuff like that, so I didn't have that issue. And there was 6 of us. I was the oldest, so nobody in my family really did that. But we all have our different experiences. So, but I didn't really see that in my family.
Jerry, what about you?
The conversation was had about, once you graduate, what's your path? Are you going to college? Or are you going to find work? So I don't think that, there are a lot of parents physically tossing them out, but it is gearing them to move out on their own, right? As opposed to, are you financially ready to move out? There's a difference in honing those skills and saying, it doesn't matter what you do, let's make sure you're financially ready to make that decision, whether it is going to school. How do you go to school and not accumulate $400,000 worth of debt, right? Because that sets you back. As opposed to, okay, you're going to school and we all going to sign these loans and keep going, I think is a disservice to our youth.
Now, one of the things that I've learned, I was a little bit lucky. I won't even get into my personal experience, but what I've seen from a financial standpoint, and I do give people financial counsel when asked, having a child assume all of that debt isn't reasonable. I've seen or even advised, I call it the 33 and the third rule. And when we're looking at, embarking on a college education, depending on one's status, the 33 and the third rule basically says that 33 and a third % belongs to the student, 33 and a third would belong to the parent if they're financially able, and the 33rd and a third becomes, I'll say, a level of aid or financial, because that's the other thing that we have to start looking at. And that's a whole different story that one of the new members of the Brothaship can talk about, because he's involved in college recruiting and education. We have to make sure that, when we make college level decisions, if that's the path that we're going to take, that it's affordable. Now, I know enough to tell you with a fairly high level of confidence that if you want to go to, say, Swarthmore, which is one of those really nice high sedity colleges, and study liberal arts at $45,000 to $60,000 a year, that's probably not a wise long-term choice, because the return on investment isn't going to be as great as going to, say, Syracuse to get a degree in chemical engineering. It is a whole different thing. And I think that that's where the guidance counseling and the understanding and awareness as a family, when we make those steps, has to really be laid out.
I think you kind of connected it. It's the return on investment, right?
Yes.
And so there goes the basis of the financial discussion in the home. Is going to Syracuse at $65,000 a year, if you're going to work in an office, a good return on investment? Or if you know that you're essentially just going to become an entrepreneur and run your own business, is that the best use of your money? But again, I think that starts at the home and having that conversation about what finances and return on investment looks like. Because there are a lot of kids who don't know what ROI means and how to leverage it.
And just again to share, it's funny. My old man, again, he was an educator, but he just would tell us things. And I remember him saying this, and it went over my head because, and just sharing my personal experience, I had no plans of going to an HBCU. And part of that was because going to a predominantly white prep school, when we were talking guidance, it was never discussed. It was totally overlooked. So I had made a decision to go to Fordham University, right in the Rose Hills campus. And this was many moons ago. And even at that time, it was around $22,000 a year in the 80s, because that's a Jesuit private school. Now, they basically, when I say they, the financial institutions at the time said, well, you have two parents that work, so you're only eligible for about $1,600 of aid annually, meaning that basically $19,800 and some change would be the nut my parents would have to pay. And my dad sat me down and he says, son, you earned the ability to go there. He says, because you're doing this, that, and the other. He says, but let me just be very clear. If I could afford that, we'd have a bigger house and probably a nicer car. Now, I'm saying that to say, through fate, I actually received a call from an HBCU, and they said, we'll give you a scholarship to check it out. And I didn't want to go away because I was so used to my surroundings. And that's another thing that, when we start talking about personal finance and how we prepare for the future, they're lessons that our children, we have to kind of just make sure that they understand, because I did not want to go. But my old man said, here's what I'll say. You make your decision. He goes, you can try it. And what he was saying without saying it was $19,800 and free. He's like, you can always come back home. Now, I always tell the story, and my friends know I could not stand going away. Part of it was homesickness. Part of it was not, adjusting, but it was the best decision that I made to stay there. And when we talk about return on investment, what I didn't know was that what was going on down there in that school of business, it was ranked at one point #1 in the country. I never knew that because I didn't do the due diligence. So I'm sharing that story to say, for me and all of the alumni that were there that didn't do it, sometimes we have to just go the extra mile and looking at these places, because when I reverse engineer the logic behind it, when these companies at that time were looking for the best and the brightest, they were going directly to the source, which were HBCUs that had that reputation. So sometimes I'm saying when we look at our children, we have to look at what's best for them and not necessarily what's best for the whole. Because I look at what's going on today, let's say in the Howards and the Florida A&Ms and the NC States and things of that nature, because of the climate that we're living in today, some of the best and brightest academic minds are going there to teach them. And we should not overlook that if that's a path that they choose.
Great segue there, because in the chat room, somebody mentioned, should we make financial institutions, teach clients about building wealth? So what's your thoughts on that?
Oh, can I jump in on that?
Absolutely.
I was waiting for you to turn your hat backwards.
Listen, that's a valid point. I mean, they got, when I was in high school, they taught us all that. They taught us how to balance a checkbook. They taught us how to write a letter and to fill out a letter form. They taught us all of that. Then all of a sudden, all of that disappeared. It's
Home
gone.
economics.
Home economics. Remember, there was auto mechanics in school. That's all gone. There was wood shop. There was home economics, sewing. They taught the sisters sewing and cooking and stuff. They don't teach that anymore. You are basically flying by the seat of your pants if your parents are not taking care of you on the other end. And usually they're not, because you got two parents working. Who has time? You know, so, and they're counting on that, you know, so they took that all away from us. And now we're all just drones, just running out there, not knowing which way to go, not knowing how to go into a bank and open up a bank account. Like Darren said, I remember that they came out to the school and they gave us a little savings book. And it was amazing to me. It was amazing. You don't see that anymore. I mean, my kids have graduated college and stuff like that. So, but all through high school, I didn't see none of that. They even took away gym, which I could not believe. They took away gym and music. There's no creative thinking. There's no critical thinking. It's all gone. So, you know, it's to me, it's just, you know, set up to fail, you know? So you got to have that lead back to what Darren's saying is in-house, your mom and your dad have to have that, where we got to sit down and we got to talk about this and we got to think on which way you want to go.
And I'm going
to
to expand on that, because you hit the nail on the hammer. But what we have to do, particularly in communities of color, is demand the services that these children need. So, for example, you know, I know that when we had open house in public school, and I went to public school for a time, I went to private school for a time. In public school at that time, parents came out. I have friends that are involved in education now, and it's almost like pulling teeth to get that representation. So like anything else, services are predicated on supply and demand, and adults have to demand that the basic services are rendered, because as a taxpayer, or even as a person living in that municipality, the mere basics should be given to children. Now, when you flip that argument on its head, we've got some parents in more fluent communities trying to dismiss or say they don't want something that's not even taught. When I say that, critical race theory as a perfect example. But when I talk about the essential things that children need, like you said, everybody's not meant, and I'm going to say this at the risk of not offending, but just informing, everybody's not going to be a CEO. Everybody's not going to be an office worker. So there has to be a safety net that capitalizes on some of these kids' strengths. You know, I can't do anything really well with my hands in terms of carpentry. So if something needs to be fixed in my primary or my secondary home, I've got to call someone, and they're going to come to me, and hopefully I at least understand what they're talking about. And they're going to charge me the going and market rate that their skill set requires. And I'm going to look at that receipt and go, oh my God, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
So I think that's where we have to have those examples ready and fortify our children with, so that they don't go down the wrong path. And I'll just share one more example before opening it up with my own godson. When he came into the world, you know, I mean, my best friend and I had the best for him, and as well as his mom. And she had that paradigm, he's going to go to college. And I remember a few years ago, I took him to dinner and I gave him a check, and I remember having the conversation. And when I left the conversation, I was a little worried about him, and I'm going to be very transparent. I didn't think that he had the same emotional intelligence or IQ that his dad and I had. It's just something I left with, because we were sending that kid 1,000 miles away from that, I'll say, loving, I'm gonna say it, spoiled environment. And he struggled. Now, the good news of this story, which is why I can tell it, is that he's going to be graduating after he made some adjustments and got more of a proximity to where his home base was. But we make that mistake sometimes with our children. And I think we got to be cognizant of that and make sure that all of those factors, sometimes the parent wants those things to have that button pop off their chest, but we got to make sure that these kids are mentally ready with all of the puts and takes and peer pressure associated with this, so that they succeed.
And Darren, on that, you also got to know your child, and you got to play to your child's strength. My mother knew me, and as soon as I graduated to 12th grade, she asked me, "What are you doing this summer?" And Goofy Babe said, "I don't know." And she said, "Well, we're going down to Apex Technical School, and I'm putting you in school, and we're going to do this." I had no idea, but it was the best thing for me, because she knew I was very good with my hands. And I was a sports guy. I played football. I did wrestling. I did all of that. So, she played to my strength. She says, "Well, I'm not a book guy. I'm not a book guy at all. But you put something in my hand, I'm going to build you something." And she played to that strength. So you got to play to your child's strengths,
Absolutely.
Bay, I think there are some adults who don't even know what they want to do. I jokingly keep saying to people, I don't know what I want to be when I grow up, at this age, right? All I do know is I want to retire early. So here's another question that I want to throw out is, we started the show talking about having a discussion about finances. Mm-hmm. Here's another point that we don't have a discussion: retirement. I see everybody on, social media planning, I'm going on this vacation, I'm going to ball out this and this and that. And I don't see not there one mention on retiring early and what I got in that 401k.
And not even a 401k, other investments, real estate, like Darren mentioned. He's got some real estate that's set for life, man. You got income coming in for life. But we're not living in that type of society. We consume. We were taught to consume since we were put on this planet. We were taught to consume. We were not taught to save or accumulate anything,
You're talking my language, and I'm glad you brought that up. Now, this is what I know. I grew up in
the alley-oop.
Yeah, slam dunk. But here's the deal. And I mentioned it earlier. My dad was a saver. My mom was a spender. And I think when you have that, I give all of the credit to my dad, because he did something that I've never done. And this is real talk. My dad would meet my mom on Friday. Every payday, they would go out to lunch, and he would give her his check. And my mom essentially by de facto managed things. She's very sharp, has a very good acumen with respect to accounting and numbers. So she did the books, for lack of a better term. But the truth of the matter is, she had a guy, whatever. And when I say guy, I'm talking about from a financial literacy standpoint. Let me be very clear. And, she basically went that path. I'm a little more hands-on. So I've devoted the past 30 years of trying to be very, very tight to the vest in planning for my financial future. Now, I'm going to share a few things because I believe in data, and I'm going to share something with you with respect to the wealth gap in America. Now, we talk about net worth, and that's what we defined at the beginning of the show. Again, for those that just joined, net worth, simply the combination of your assets minus your liabilities, is what you're left with. In America, The median net worth for white Americans is $188,000. For Black Americans, the median net worth is $24,000. So that's almost a 10x gap at the median level of income of net worth. Now, aggregately, what that tells us is that that's about an 11 to 13.5 trillion dollar gap. So that means that, you know, when you look at that distribution of wealth, and we don't have to get into the root causes of it because I want this to be a solutions-oriented approach. As African Americans, we have a large gap to close, and I want to talk about how to close that. Now, when we start looking at this distribution of net worth, now I'll just break it down. The bottom 25% of people have a net worth of $12,000 as of 2020. So that's abject poverty because no one's making a living with $12,430. The bottom 50%, that net worth is $121,400. Now remember, that's not your income because some people have homes, some people have accumulated some type of other assets. But when we start going into that 75% tile, you're looking at a net worth of $403,000. Now the top 10% of people in America have a net worth of $1.2 million. So if you take your calculation, which is fairly easy to pull together, if you have a net worth of 1.2 million or higher, you're in the top 10% of America. Now here's where it really gets interesting. The top 1% of America has a net worth of $11 million. That is huge. So when we start looking at things through the prism of net worth, the top 1% has $11 million. And if you're on the top 10%, you have 10 times as less of that. So, you know, while I like to be an optimist, here's what we do know. The older you are, the less inclined you are to increase your net worth. I'll say that again. The older you are, the less inclined you are to increase your net worth. Now, again, the other elements of how we make money, unless you inherit money or marry into it or hit the lottery, those are arguably the most likely ways you can increase that net worth. Now, that's not to say that someone can't come along and create a product or service to create that injection, but where I'm saying is that where you typically are tends to be, right, wrong, or indifferent, a manifestation of where you're going to really be. One other thing that I wanted to point out is that for me as an individual that has been very vigilant in trying to make net worth a point of view, I've looked at ways to increase it. And I can tell you this, having a job and working and saving isn't going to get you anywhere near the top 10% of that net worth. You have to develop a plan that creates incremental income through the value of compound interest, if that makes sense. So in other words, most people that get from not having an inheritance or marrying into money get into that top 10% through a disciplined methodology of investing their money every single day. And there's very easy ways to do that. I would always tell people to look at mechanisms if they have a sponsored work 401k program. That's one way. Or if they're self-employed, a 403k program. Or if they're not comfortable in understanding the stock market, looking at a licensed professional. These days, there's so many automated platforms that you can use to do that. But one of the things that I've told younger people is if you have a work ethic and the discipline, you can and usually will be able to hit a level of comfortability in your finances, but you have to invest it. Some people are very comfortable with real estate. I myself believe in the stock market only because I know that since its inception, the aggregate return on investment has been annualized at around 13%. So without getting into a lot of machinations of numbers, if you work for 30 years, when you first get that job and you start investing 10%, you'll probably end up very comfortable. And that's something that someone actually told me this. And when I was working with him, I believed him. He was a coworker of mine. He took an interest of me. And he said, Darren, you know what? He goes, you got a good job. He says, man, you better start saving. And I was one to go out to the clubs every night, trust me, and party. But he says, you know, man, if I were you, I would start putting a little chunk away. And how I really foresaw that as a real life aspiration was when he retired and moved to Costa Rica and bought a villa. And he was working the same job that I was working when I first got into it. So I was like, he wasn't lying. He was right. Now, how I'll flavor that, and it's something I didn't know because you only know half the story of someone else's story, is that you've also got to supplement that income with additional income streams. So what I typically tell people when we talk about personal finance, what do you like to do? You know, and make that something that brings in more income. I like playing records. Well, you know what? There are people that are willing to pay me to play records to add to the soundtrack of their life via DJ. You know, Bay has a very good skill set where he can take a camera and make you look better, you know, and then or enhance your beauty, you know, and things of that nature. Some people can sell, you know, ice water to, you know, souls in hell or whatever. And
Eskimos.
Yeah. But they have that ability and they go out there and they can sell, you know, cutlery or whatever. So that's an essential part of the new normal. You know, I joked with folks, I said, you know, when I retire, I might just drive Uber. I wouldn't now, but you know, that's still something that brings in additional money. The gig economy is here to stay. So, I have a long answer to this, but I really think that, you know, retiring requires a lot of vigilance. It requires yourself to begin putting yourself on a budget. I started my career on a budget. I don't need a budget anymore. But what I'm finding as I constantly research and try to hone gliding this plane I call retirement, I have to get back on a budget because the way you optimize a fixed income is understanding every penny that you're spending. Because what happens in the investment game that I've played over a 30-year period, I spent a lot of time accumulating assets. And that's part of personal finance. You go from, you know, learning to get a job and be employable to accumulating assets. Then at some point you have to be able to insure those assets. God forbid, what if I get hit by a car, you know, and I can't work? I have to be able to make sure that those assets are still stable so that I can pass them on to either my wife or the next generation. But then where a lot of people miss the boat is they have to seriously consider the deceleration model and migrate from working to enjoying the nest egg that they've accumulated. Because quite frankly, if you're taking advantage to some of the vehicles to build wealth, i.e. tax deferred savings, you have to pay the piper. You know, a lot of people forget that, you know, all of that money you see in that 401k exploding during good times, Uncle Sam comes on the back end and wants that money back. So you have to have a sound, what I'll call distribution strategy of accumulating wealth over time. Now, some people say that the rule of thumb is 4%. Well, that's okay, but we then have to get into the deeper level of conversation around how your asset allocation is. Now, I'll be very frank, I'm 55 years old. What I've realized is that for me, while I still have a more aggressive portfolio, I need to quickly make the asset allocation less volatile because I don't have the value of time to withstand any dips. Perfect example. Last year when COVID hit, I was in South America on business. I, like a few others, didn't understand the magnitude of the pandemic. And we actually in 2020 experienced the largest bear market. And a bear market is one where stocks pull back or are corrected at 20% or more during a sustained period of time. I lost over $200,000 in 3 weeks. Now, that was an anomaly, and I actually made a mistake, and I rarely make mistakes in the game. And what I did was I panicked. And the reason I panicked was because I knew that, and I'm going to editorialize right now with my understanding of the market. Right now, in all of the capital markets, there's been an injection of propaganda that's negatively influencing or artificially influencing the market. So that can jade your decision making. But after losing $200,000 on paper, go up in smoke, I panicked and went to stable markets. Now, that's a no-no for anybody that's thinking about investing. You have to allow the market to do its thing. And even if it's an anomaly, if you have a correction, it's always best to stay there. Now, the good news is that I actually wound up making 7% at the end of the year when the market bounced back. But had I just left things alone, I would have made an additional 30% by just leaving it alone. So the moral of that story, in long, short, if you have investments and you see a precipitous drop, don't panic, because that's why it's the greatest money maker, because time. You were going to say something.
Darren, I got a question for you. What would you say to a 25-year-old kid making maybe, let's say, $25 an hour, between $25, $30 an hour? What would you say, Darren? What financial advice would you give that kid?
You know what I would tell it? I would tell a 25-year-old, I would tell someone the same thing that someone told me. If you take that money and you pay yourself first, and you make sure that you can max out in your 401k and you stay employed and you keep that passion and maybe figure out a side gig, you'll be a millionaire by the time you're 55. That's what I would tell that person.
It's a basic, get the richest man of Babylon book too.
Exactly. I would tell them that. I would
Yeah,
say, you know what?
I
would say, you know what? And to be very honest, as you choose a mate, and I'm not saying everything is about money, but we start checking some of the pitfalls that create that from not happening. Marry someone that you not only love, but is your friend. Because there's another equation around that with respect to asset allocation that quickly gets dissolved if a marriage is dissolved. So I would say, number one, and always keep learning, because this is no longer the 30-year career path that our parents once had. So you always have to keep that skill set fresh. But if you can maintain a 30-year employment and making just, I'll say, the cost of living bump, but you continue to make that sacrifice of maxing out. And right now, just for math's sake, the maximum that you can contribute to a 401k right now is $19,000 a year. If you're over 50, you have what they call a catch-up allowance of $26,000 a year. So all you have to do is look at a future calculation in the value of money and just say, okay, I put in $19,000 and get I'll say 9% return over 30 years, and you continue to contribute, that number is easily going to be over $1 million over 30 years. So I tell people, do that. And then once you learn the market, you can make your own moves, because right now we've got platforms like Ameritrade or Fidelity and things of that nature. And once you understand that, you'll quickly begin to start, it comes to you. Now, I was very afraid to get into the options market. It's something that I recently did, and I taught myself. Now, my way of learning isn't for everybody's. I had to lose a few $1,000s to understand it, but now I'm in a position where I get it. And the beauty of options is that you can make money in an up market the same way you can make money in a down market, but it just requires a little bit of quantitative analysis and knowing the market. What I typically tell people is that we complicate our lives unnecessarily. The people that know every stat in the sports page, dead. If that's not making you money, then you just are storing knowledge that you probably don't need to. Look at the Wall Street Journal. When you start picking up certain stats about who's the earnings, dominant force, you can begin to put some money behind that. And that's what people are doing.
Darren, someone in the chat.
Go ahead, babe. I was about to read the chat question.
Yeah. Someone in the chat room said, what's the options market, Darren?
Okay,
And
options
I missed
market.
the other question.
All right, I'm going to make the options market real simple. Basically, options are a form of trading where you can either place a call option or a put option. A call option is where you're speculating the future price of a stock over an extended period of time, where a put option is you're predicting the decline of a stock price over an extended period of time. So, for example,
Is that like hedge funding?
But at an individual level, yes. Hedge funds. People hear of hedge funds because that's kind of I'll call it an exclusive club. Now, I will tell you, 5 years ago, I got an invitation to get into a hedge fund, and they asked me what my net worth was, right? I put it down. They said, "You're not ready." So 5 years later, the market's been very well. That same place called me. I put in my net worth. They said, "We want you to come in," but they wanted quite a chunk of money. But here's the value of a hedge fund. A hedge fund is an exclusive club for people that have certain net worth. But when the market's down like 10%, they're still getting 10 and 15% positive returns because they work on a lot of short selling, derivative type of trading, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a high level, high risk game where they still come out on top because they have access to the information. I digress. With the options market, you're looking at basically speculating the price. So I can share with you just one specific example with Apple. Now, everybody knows Apple. They are the king of the iPhone, obviously, but what a lot of people don't know is that Apple, they're making money hand over fist based on a model that the founder, Steve Jobs, created, which is business services. Anything you use with Apple has to have what? An Apple peripheral. You have to use the app. You have to buy the hardware, and you have some type of connection with every hardware purchase that you have with Apple. So they are going to always make money. Now, during the pandemic, what a lot of people don't know is that sales of Apple products, not just the iPhone, but the iPads, skyrocketed in conjunction with its business services. And what people don't realize is that after the most recent Apple stock split, which occurred 2 years ago, the price was fairly stagnant. So that, coupled with certain supply chain constraints and just, I'll say, lethargy with the Apple stock. Sometimes in investment circles, we get what they call stock price fatigue, where people aren't necessarily going there. Apple stagnated at the beginning of the year and was only at around $110 per share. Now it's at around $145 per share. So to answer the specific options question, I knew that based on the earnings, which I call into and listen to, I knew that based on what happened, sales or growth almost doubled year over year. I know that what's going to happen in Q3 is that sales are going to, or volume's going to go down because some of that volume was front loaded. I still think that Apple stock is going to pop. So rather than just, I have over 600 shares today. So rather than continue to buy shares of there, I'm going to take the money. And I know that at the time when the stock was $130, I said, you know what? based on all that information I shared with you, I bet that between now and November, that price is going to be not 130, but it's going to be about minimally $135. Where I bought my options. Right now, that stock is sitting at around $145. I already doubled my money. So that's it's a little bit more than that because you have to look at the different strike prices, and that's where you base this option. It's the last and most volatile area of investment for people. So I think that what I would recommend is that if you really want to know about it, give me a shout out on Facebook if you're really interested, and I can try to explain it to you. As far as for the stock layman, what I tell people when people tell me about recommending stocks, and I do actually do that, there's a caveat, and I would be remiss if I didn't share that caveat with you. Before I tell anybody about stocks, I ask them fundamental questions like, number one, do you have an emergency fund? Because if you remember anything that I said, the way people make that quote unquote long money is buying stock and holding it. This day trader thing, it's an attractive thing, but I'm a buy and hold guy. I've had Apple stock since 2011, okay? So I've experienced the three stock splits that have occurred during that time. When I knew that was going to split, I bought it. So I will tell people first, before you buy one stock in any platform, make sure that you have 6 to 8 months of liquidity, because that's another part of financial literacy that we tend to overlook. Everyone wants to chase the rabbit, but you got to have enough carrots so that you can, feed that rabbit. So
that's a great segue, because one of the questions we kind of skipped over was, where do we begin when it comes to transforming our current poverty mentality in terms of building financial stability and building wealth? So I know you touched on it before, when you said we basically with assets, but please jump in back.
No, I got to step away, gentlemen, and just when it was getting good, I got to step away, which I hate to do, but I'm just letting you guys know, Darren, man, you hit me with some good ones today, man. I definitely appreciate it.
I'm just getting started, so
But let me step away, gentlemen.
Okay, Jerry and I will land the plane.
Okay, I'm gonna jump out.
All right. I hope you got a parachute, brother.
Yeah. I'll see you guys next month, and I'll talk to you after the show.
Okay. All right. So Jerry, I mean, I'm passionate about this. So if you gotta intervene, just let me know. But to answer this question, before we get back into like the technical aspects of investing, the one thing that I also tell people is that we've got to have, and I had to learn this myself, so I only share from experience, is that we've got to acknowledge and put in our minds the concept of delayed gratification. We live in an environment now where people have very short attention spans, or they want to get the quan before paying the dues. So for example, when I graduated, I felt, because I was so depraved of having money, that when I walked by that new car dealership, and he knew that I had that sheepskin just by the way I was probably walking and talking, here's the Toyota Celica tricked out at that time in 1980. We can give you this car brand new, and we can give you a 60-month mortgage. I'm sorry, car note, same thing, at around, I think it was $359 a month. That's, first of all, when you look at 60 months paying a car off for a depreciable asset without even owning a home, that doesn't even make good common sense. But give a 21-year-old person that's not ever made any significant money regularly and thinks that he's done something because he has a job, and you got a sucker. But thank goodness I didn't buy it. So where I'm going with that is, I think that when we change the paradigm from poverty mindset to wealth building is we've got to learn the difference between things that appreciate in value versus depreciate in value. You know, I didn't buy a new car until I was in my 30s because there were priorities that needed to be knocked down before that. One was buying my first home, which I did at 27. And to do that, I had to work 3 jobs for 2 years, but it was something that I set on a timeline. I said, you know what? I have a good job. I need to get a part-time job because I could work on the weekends. And then I had the DJing gigs. So those were the 3 jobs. I did the math of what I wanted to buy. And then I figured out that I'd need at least 10 to 15% of a down payment. Now I could have gone to mommy and daddy, but I didn't. I wanted to do it myself. So I think part of the answer to that question is setting reasonable goals for yourself, but aggressive ones, because that was a tough, you know, making that commitment was tough, but I did it.
I guess I want to jump in right there because to answer that question, I guess assets for me, right, in defining how do we change that mindset, I think it becomes that beginning conversation of what net worth is. Where do you want to end up in life? And so I think having those conversations, you get to the delayed gratification that you're talking about, Darren, right?
Right.
So is it worth you spending $379 over 60 months for that shiny new car that won't be shiny in 60 months? Or can you spend $5,000, pay for it right now, and don't have, you know, any note, and save that $379, let's just say for 45 months, right? Because you're going to just take away what you just spent on that car. And so I guess when, you know, I'm looking at the numbers between real estate, mutual funds, and pensions, you've got to figure out what assets you can put your money in that's going to work for you. And I think we have to start having that conversation with our children, with ourselves, that it's okay to go see somebody who might be a professional, right? It's okay to make an appointment with a financial manager and say, how do I get here? They might say, okay, let's go down these group of questions. You might not be ready, right? Because like Darren said, you might need to put the 3 to 6 months of money away. Then you're gonna come back to talk to me. But at least having that conversation gets us in the mind frame of building wealth and gets out of that poor mentality mindset of the instant gratification. I've got to have the biggest trip and the biggest car and the flashiest clothes without having the biggest retirement fund, without having the biggest, you know, savings, is a mindset that we've got to get out of.
And here's the other thing that I think that we neglect and I don't hear in all of the different dialogues for youngsters and even people our age. We have to start seriously assessing cooperative economics. You know, you hear the term buying the block. How come you don't have in, you know, high net worth individuals, particularly people of color, or just people that have the same mindset, 10 people putting 10 grand together? You can do something with that. You can build something with that.
I think my thoughts, I think because you have so many people who are behind that imaginary line that are trying to play catch up to build wealth, that they don't want to take away from it and investing in something that could truly build wealth for them, right? But I think if we started a small scale, and I saw somebody in the chat room mention an investment club. You know, I used to have one with the intentions of buying property from the profits. And so I think we need to start having those conversations again, that, you know, we can build wealth, we can do it collectively. I think those are the conversations we need to begin having again.
Absolutely.
At earlier ages.
And here's the thing, you know, I get opportunities, I'll say a lot, you know, like being an angel investor and things of that nature. And just for full transparency, you know what tends to happen when I go through the numbers? I'm more comfortable investing in the market because that's what I've spent 30 years trying to do. And that challenges me because at some point, I worry about that sometimes because I'm doing what I need to your point, to maximize and optimize what I know can happen. I can tell you with, I can tell you with fair confidence level, when we talk about this asset allocation thing, if you do nothing with your money, that's what it's going to be. You're not going to gain anything. $100 under the mattress is going to be $100, maybe plus, some bed bugs if you leave it alone. If you put $100 in the bank, it's going to be $100 and maybe 30 cents after a year if you do nothing. If you take $100 and you put it in the stock market, it's going to be worth $113 if you get the average annual return based on data. So knowing that, if you buy a house and that $100 invested in that, arguably, depending on where you have it and, whether you have it fully occupied, if it's a rental or if it's a commercial, you're probably going to get $110. These things I know when you analyze it. So you pick what's best for you, because with the real estate market, we're starting to talk about, do you want quick money or long money? One of the secrets that I have with real estate is I've never raised the rent on the property I've owned for 20 years and I could. But you know what? That's baked into my financial plan. And my property manager said, you can get this for it. I said, but if I get that person in there, they're going to ask the next door neighbor what their rent is, and they're going to know they have a steal, which is an incentivizing force for them to stay there and pay me on time. Because, I can easily get it, but I don't want to, because that's the other thing about personal finance. When we're in the green, we can't be greedy. And people have gone broke being greedy. And you have to count those blessings and, more importantly, tell someone else how to make money. There's something contagious about making wealth building a mindset, because one, you tend to gravitate toward other people that have the same ideas. And that investment club that you mentioned, Jerry, I think is such a good idea. And people have been doing it. And I think the other thing too is that, and this is more outside of the money-making realm, is you have to have a positive attitude. Because what I think is when we start to look at the TV, or we start to listen to people that don't have that positive thought process, we tend to get caught up in it. And, like I said, I wake up with the mindset first of how I can make money versus how I can spend it. Now, trust me, I do like to spend it, but I also start out going, well, before I talk about, my wife will tell you, I will put up a hassle about $1,000, but there's a logic behind it, because I want to make sure that I truly understand where it's going, why it's going there. If it's a liability, is the product value worth it? Because I know that if it's worth it, I won't have to reinvest it to fix it again. Those type of things.
So another question from the chat. What happens if your job doesn't offer a 401k? What other avenues? I'll jump out because I know you might have a couple of answers, Darren. You could get a Roth IRA through your bank or any of those financial institutions like Fidelity, E-Trade. That's what I know. Darren, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think, statistically, I think the number is roughly about 65% of employers offer a 401 or a 403. But if you're in that 35% that doesn't have that, then you would basically have to invest on your own. And I think that depending on the eligibility requirements that Roth IRA provides, that would arguably be the best route for you. Now, for those of you that aren't aware of what a Roth IRA is, that is a distribution that you're actually putting into an account after taxes, but upon disbursement, it's tax-free. So there are obviously qualifying limits to how much you can put in based on income, but I think that that's the best thing to do. And again, I have diversification, which is the other cornerstone of personal wealth procurement. You got to have diversity. Do not have all of your eggs in one basket. I tend to tell people Fidelity is a very good platform because it's not only the product offerings they have, it's the tutorials. Remember, this thing is something when you commit to personal finance, you're going to learn something very new. I mean, my investment game is good, but when I do my self-assessment, I need to understand how I'm going to work with the benefits of it, i.e. the tax piece. Right now, I know that if I try to sell all of a particular stock, I got to see the tax man. So it's probably in my best interest to understand how that game works. Now, I do know what I'll call the capital gain, capital loss swap, where you can sell certain things at a loss. And sometimes having a loss, by the way, for those of you that do have portfolios, that can help you because that minimizes the bite of the gain. So it's an offset of sorts. So again, if you don't have a company sponsored one, you're left on your own, and there are plenty of vehicles that can help you effectively do that.
So I know time is coming to an end, and I kind of just want to circle back and make sure, we've kind of touched all of the aspect in terms of wealth management, wealth building. Is there something else you want to add to that?
Absolutely. Here's what I say. I have an optimistic view when it comes to personal wealth because I learned it, and I always tell people the way I got involved in it and became serious was asking my financial mentor for a loan for $20 because I was going to the clubs every night. And when I asked him for $20, he sat right next to me. He said, "What do you need $20 for?" I was like, "Because I need it," because I was basically making up for lost time and partying every night, as someone new to a city that I'd moved to. And he was the guy that kind of just said, "Listen, you need to be serious about this." He goes, "Because you can do it, And I listened to him, and he would give me his money magazine after he read it. And I always say, like anything, it's like learning a new language, You benefit from learning a new language, not through just looking and hunting and pecking. You learn it through immersion. So if you are serious about really understanding the investing marketplace, you have to immerse yourself in it. You have to look at what's out there. And, maybe I'm what do you call it? Maybe I'm a romantic, but I believe that with all of the information that we have, we sometimes don't effectively use it. So in other words, with all of the technology that we have, you can just really immerse yourself in understanding. I tell people, just even Googling, what are the best performing stocks for 2021? You'll find that, and then you have to find out what's comfortable for you. Now I'm into sector indexing, and that would be my other point to tell people. If you're not comfortable with understanding what a particular stock is, look at the sectors. Now there's certain defined sectors that are out there that, have performed very well. Information technology is one. Right now, because there's been a cyclical change in the stock market, real estate and financials and materials and communication services have been on fire. But again, beware, that is but a blip. Remember the two things, if you remember anything in the conversation that we've had. The stock market is not a function of today. Stock market's a function of the future, which is why we invest, because we want our future investment to appreciate. So knowing that you can use trends as a guideline, but you always have to be on the game to understand what's happening now. Perfect example. When Joe Biden took over, electric or EV stocks skyrocketed. I made a killing, but I knew I had to get in and get out. Well, I only knew that because I was reading and immersing myself in what was going on in the industry. All of those fuel cell and electronic cars, Plug and Spark, all of those companies, they went up and now they're back down. Hit and miss, So I think that if you look at the sectors, as I'll say, a bellwether of what's going on, you take the sectors that are hot and then do the analysis of the various dominant stocks in there. I want to answer that question for the stock layman. I like Netflix right now. They're a little high. I still say Apple, for somebody that's looking at growth and income. So you've got to also understand as a potential investment what you want. Do you want capital appreciation, i.e. the stock price continuing to grow? If you're someone in my age, you know what I want? I want that dividend income. There's certain stocks that have a very high dividend. So for example, ExxonMobil is something that I chose in November and shared with my group of constituents. I said, I think that this is a good one for you. Well, you know what? It's since November yielded a 30% return, and that dividend yield is roughly 7%. So for me, I'm getting the best of both worlds through stock price appreciation in addition to the dividends. Now, the final question that we'll take with 5 minutes left was, what are the 3 biggest tips you give to parents for their children from this discussion? I would tell them to be serious about their financial future, because here's the reality. And don't scare them, but give them the truth. I think, when I look back at the very rich conversations my parents gave me, they were very honest and transparent, but, parents have a tendency to shield, the realities of them. Tell them, hey, you know what? You're going to have to work twice as hard for what I have, because the game is getting different. You're going to have to know so much more, because more is expected. These trade jobs that we talk about, they're actually being automated, believe it or not. So again, the first thing is be a saver, don't be a spender. Understand that, a lifelong of knowledge. I think a lot of times we figured out that, or assumed once we got out of college and got that sheepskin, that we'd be okay. Well, that's the difference between getting promotions in the organization and not. Getting certified for additional things that expand that knowledge base are going to help build that wealth, because you're going to be making more money by meeting the prerequisites of the job functions that advance over time. For working adults, just maintain the plane. You can easily determine whether or not you should be where you're at, based on your 401 thing, and come to the realization, to get there, you may have to work longer. I wrestle with, I think I could retire today, but there are factors that are unknown. God forbid if my health fails. Healthcare is expensive. I have to make an informed decision, and actually I need to make a commitment to stay healthy. For retirees, the biggest thing is making sure that that asset allocation is stable enough so when they do their future projections and disbursements, that they have enough to live on. We're living longer, thank goodness, even though life expectancy for the first time since World War II has reduced. But, by and large, people that I knew were only living to be 65. My mother, God bless her, she's 83. She's outlived my grandmother by 20 something years. And thank goodness she has the resources. So we have to keep in mind all of those things as we build a plan. And that's the last biggest tip I would say, have a plan. Did you know that only 49% of Americans are involved in the stock market? I can tell you now that, again, don't marry into this money and get an inheritance or have this product or service if you're only getting the fundamental bank returns that are invested or where you hold your money, you're going to struggle. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jerry and he can close it out.
I guess my 3 points is teach financial literacy as early as possible and as often as possible. Understanding, assets and liabilities, what they are, how they affect you. The next thing I would definitely talk to kids or anybody about is plan for retirement. Darren touched about it. Anything can go wrong or right. Your health can change. Your assets can lose value or gain value. So you've got to plan for a retirement. And I think the last thing for me is understanding ROI. You've got to understand what your investments are going to bring you in return, and whether it's worth investing in. And so if you understand, for me, those three principles, I think that opens the door for you to begin building wealth.
Guys, thank you so much, the live audience, for joining in. I hope you found our session entertaining and informative, and just realize that, you know, we're all occupants of the planet that can bring a lot of value. And all I say is that in the personal finance game, whatever value that we do derive for our fruits and services, we want to just make them exponentially grow. If you keep that in mind and just always be on the look for opportunities and investing enhancement, you'll be fine. Thank you guys and have a great day.
Thanks.
Communities blow.
Yo, so you got a sec? I need to build for a minute.
What's up?
Matter of fact, you can chill for a minute. I
Okay.
need a platform where we can talk about some other shit. Get jewels for some other man. I'm looking for a brothership.
Get it right, this real life. We tired of struggling. Airtight on this shot, no more dysfunctioning. We reeling in the sunken and we bringing in our brother in the battles that you face and be a cannon with our confidence.
No disrespect to my sisters at all, but it's the barbershop talk. Talk to kid at the bar and talk ways. And just a little hustle to get paid. And just a little game to get laid. And the importance of my credit, stock, and hip hop education not embedded. Listen, I need a place where I can talk about some other. The jewels for some other man. I'm looking for a brother.